Okay, hello everybody. Hello everybody. Hello everybody. Don't know if you saw this particular news, but I find it significant enough that I'm going to do what I do on occasion to mark significant events, which is share the link to this YouTube chat on Twitter. And I will tweet right now. It is out. And I will kill some time before I begin in earnest, as presumably some people trickle in to hear what I have to say. Now, if you're on Twitter or if you're on some wavelength which entails you following developments in the media, you may have seen that Glenn Greenwald resigned from the Intercept today, which is made all the more significant of a development because, newsflash, he founded the Intercept around 7 years ago. So for him to take as dramatic a step as to resign suddenly should underscore the extent to which he possessed a feeling of discontent with the direction the Intercept had clearly taken, which was a marked departure from what he had originally envisioned for it. And you can read at great length his rationale for this in the statement that he posted on his new Substack earlier today. So I don't have to rehearse all that for you here. I will just observe that if the trends, which have become so dominant and so stifling and so conformity inducing across the wide swath of the media landscape, also infiltrated the Intercept to the extent that it would compel the founder, Glenn Greenwald, to resign, then that, I think, ought to be an indication of how all-consuming these trends are. And what do I mean by trend? Well, I mean by the trend, what I mean by that is the trend of ideological homogeneity. I mean of a partisan impulse, which is in the present moment mostly manifest as a commitment to the ideal that Trump, Donald J. Trump, our beloved president, our favorite president, must be removed at all costs. And so the normal journalistic calculus that would, you'd think, accompany an election, meaning we should scrutinize both candidates, we should, as impartially as possible, convey to readers and viewers and listeners and whomever else is consuming our content the nature and record and ideological disposition of the candidates who are likely to win the election. That's all essentially out the window because Trump is taking on such an enormously outsized presence in the lives and daily consciousnesses of the people who run the media that it almost doesn't occur to them that anything like equal or even roughly comparable scrutiny ought to be doled out to the two candidates. Because I don't even think that they're totally into Biden. Like, I don't think Biden excites most members of the media. They're only excited about him insofar as he is the vehicle by which Trump can be removed, which would be the ultimate emotional gratification for them. And maybe they're kind of like partially enthused about Kamala Harris, although, even that I think will probably wear off. I don't know that her history-making potential is really going to be enough to last in terms of the favorability with which she is viewed by much of the media. All that is to say that they are so monomaniacally focused on the fascistic specter of Trump that they can't even entertain virtually any other consideration at this juncture. And so, even if you founded a media outlet on a set of principles, and over the course of the management of that outlet, you delegated editorial responsibilities to others so you could focus on other things. This is what Greenwald more or less had done with the Intercept. Even then, you can be basically run into a brick wall in terms of your desire to even put out something that's minimally scrutinizing of the Democratic candidate in this scenario where it's such an imperative, an existential imperative in the minds of the media that Trump be defeated, given all his grave cataclysmic harms in their mind. And again, for that dynamic to have even enveloped the Intercept, which I can guarantee you is not really even a pro-Biden per se outlet. What they're pro is the urgent necessity of removing Trump. But I guess in whatever calculus is going on right now, that precludes even a relatively straightforward, yes, it was polemical, meaning what Greenwald had wanted to write, and it was kind of intertwined with some media criticism, intertwined with a synthesis of the available facts regarding the newest developments around Biden's purported business dealings that this gentleman, Tony Bobulinski, is that right, has brought to light. It was a standard sort of Greenwald piece that you would be familiar with if you had followed him for the past 15 years. And guess what happened? For the first time in 15 years, that Greenwald has been writing publicly about U.S. political affairs and about all manner of topics under that broad umbrella, he was stifled. Because Greenwald is in a position, unlike 99.9999% of journalists, including myself, which is that if they want to publish at an outlet, what you have to do is go through an ordinary editorial process, and editors have veto power if they so choose to exert that power. Like, I couldn't go to the Intercept, I couldn't go to whatever other publication that I write for and just unilaterally publish stuff. Greenwald, however, is the founder of the outlet. He gets to circumvent that to a large degree that is not available to most others. And that had largely been abided by, in fact, almost entirely abided by in his entire tenure there, with, some marginal concessions in terms of content that could legally jeopardize the publication, which has to go through a lawyerly review at times, or other stuff that falls under a very narrow rubric. He has free reign, or previously had free reign, to write essentially whatever he wanted at the Intercept, and I think he's entitled to that by dint of having founded the Intercept on the base, which the only reason it now exists is because his credibility journalistically was the foundation for it. So for him to have run into this brick wall, given the major, almost unparalleled latitude that he had in the context of that outlet, shows you how untenable it is to approach this current election, and this even has antecedents going back throughout the Trump presidency. It shows you how untenable it is to really do anything that's worthwhile journalistically nowadays. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think the broad thrust of what I'm about to say is true, which is that it's so constantly impossible to do anything that has real journalistic merit, meaning it doesn't just follow along with whatever the trendy fads are of the day in terms of anti-Trump resistance or protest movement stuff or whatever is not necessarily fashionable. It's impossible to do anything of real, genuine, substantive merit if you don't have some independent backing. And that's why I rely on my YouTube viewers, on my other crowdsourced funders to provide me an ability to do what I feel is the most appropriate journalistic work according to my own discretion. And so just think, if Greenwald can't even operate with latitude anymore, just think of the countless other journalists with far less stature, far less leverage. Think of how boxed in they are. Think of how hobbled they are. And granted, you're only going to be hobbled or boxed in if you're already of the mindset to kind of contravene prevailing media orthodoxy. So most journalists have no interest in doing that at all. They're contentedly in their little social club where they have these in-group, signaling mechanisms to one another, and they have a fun little time, and they have their little soirees, or at least they did pre-COVID. Maybe they're back to doing it now because they're going crazy in their apartments. But they're more or less, they're fine to go along with the flow. And if you're not going to go with the flow, if you're kind of instinctively unable to go with the flow, you can call that contrarianism if you'd like. I know I get that label attached to me fairly frequently, but I think for a journalist, and I'm not going to laud myself as the most groundbreaking journalist of all time or anything, I'm not somebody who's going to bandy my supposed bombshell accomplishments, which, don't rise to the level of somebody like a Greenwald, sure, for sure. But if you have that instinct, which is to buck consensus, or at least to be very much skeptical of consensus, then first of all, I think that's a healthy impulse, regardless of whether you might be accused flippantly of contrarianism. But if you do have that impulse, which is a healthy one, you're going to encounter untold resistance within the present media climate. And, maybe it could change to some extent after this election, depending on the outcome. We don't know. But I think it is worth memorializing in this moment the degree to which that stifling conformity reigns supreme in our vaunted media. And, I've never worked with the New York Times, I've never worked with the Washington Post. So I haven't been in the belly of the beast to that extent, but I at least have some peripheral knowledge of how the media industry works. I've worked in online media, online progressive media with the Young Turks for a period of time, and I've written for major publications. So I have some perspective on the inner workings of all this, and I'm not going to claim that I'm censored or I'm inhibited from writing in what I would like to write in every regard, because I'm not. I'm able to do a fair amount of stuff that I'm content with, but that's only because I'm able to undergird myself with something like an independent foundation that people like you make possible, thankfully. And it's a unique scenario that I'm in. where I'm not 100% reliant on any of these publications or corporate networks or little self masturbatory Twitter in groups to be sustainable. And so then I'm able to kind of parlay that into contributions to major outlets that I'm content with. But it's for the most part, it's very difficult for people. If you're not a knee-jerk conformist. And so, let that be a lesson. Let it be known that as of today, October 29th, 2020, this is the state of affairs in the U.S. media. And I don't think you can fully appreciate the magnitude of the problem unless you've had that up close or personal vantage point, as I have to some degree, as clearly Greenwald has and others in that orbit. So you, as an observer or a commenter or whomever, might have a certain level of awareness of the pathologies that are present in the current media landscape, but it's difficult to have a full appreciation of it unless you've been able to witness it firsthand. And this episode with Greenwald and the Intercept is, in a way, like the most dramatic culmination of so much of what I've been talking about for quite a while now. And I think should really give people pause if they have the interest to contemplate how it is that a sequence of events like this could have come about. But the good news, I would say, is that there's a silver lining, because I hear from people all the time who clearly are interested in a media product which is not tethered to these stale orthodoxies, which does not inculcate stifling conformity and, yes, groupthink, which does encourage independence of mind, independence of thought, and cultivates a type of journalist, a type of analyst, a type of commentator who is not just going to regurgitate whatever's been spoon-fed to them. And by the way, I do think a lot of so-called progressive media, the Intercept included, although they may pose as fearless and adversarial and bold and progressive and blah, 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 really they're almost in lockstep with the corporate media for the most part. There's not a whole lot of difference between their sensibilities. They have no distance virtually whatsoever in terms of how they've portrayed the meaning of Trump. They are in total agreement about how he's some ruthless fascist, etc. And that's colored so much of their coverage, so much of their output. So I don't exempt in any way these supposedly, brave and subversive media outlets who posture as being antagonistic toward prevailing media orthodoxies, but really, for the most part, just sustain them through their kind of fake, superficial, subversive, or radical aesthetic, which is just a facade. And so the silver lining is, look, I think there's clearly an opportunity to do something better, to provide something to the public that they can have confidence in, that isn't partisan, that isn't doctrinaire, that does seek to cultivate that independence of mind, which is so critical to, I think, journalism, and which has been so lacking, especially these past 4 years. So you'll notice, if you read Greenwald's statement, there is a reference to potentially a new sort of endeavor, media-wise, that he had been thinking about pursuing with a group of others. And let's just say that I think there's good cause to believe that such an endeavor would be successful. And that's all I'll say about that for the time being. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in to this impromptu live chat. I'm going to go through some of the super chats. Donna says, "I'm really curious what they're going to do if Biden wins. Will it suddenly become a story next week?" If you're referring to what could become a story next week, is the Hunter Biden or Biden business dealings? I'll say this. I think if the Republicans end up being in opposition, they're going to vigorously pursue this Biden story. I mean, they're going to latch onto something, right, that could impede Biden. They're going to seek vengeance for what they feel, largely correctly, was just an unjustified barrage of quote unquote resistance to Trump that was really without merit. So there'll be some Republicans who will latch onto it, I think, strongly. Maybe Biden will have a bit of a grace period. Who knows? He definitely is very enthusiastic about proclaiming how committed he is to bipartisanship and not being a president just for Democrats, but for all America. So that could possibly entail, a little bit of a break being cut to him by Republicans, at least for a little while. But I mean, you can be sure that they will pour over all these documents, all these materials in due course. And who knows, maybe they'll even impeach him over it, because impeachment is the thing that probably will happen now with lots of regularity, given how that constitutional mechanism was wielded against Trump. Ankush says, "Will the corporatists consolidate power after defeating the great Satan? Should we expect an amping up of cultural purification of heterodoxies?" I think that's an open question. I think there are kind of competing considerations around that, or different things to weigh. So I know that there are some people who have said that they're going to be voting Trump or have voted Trump because they feel it would be a bulwark against what you call their corporate consolidation of corporate power in service of purification of cultural heterodoxy. So that's one way to put it. The odd thing is, I think with Trump out of the picture, assuming that happens, let's just assume for the moment that does happen, I don't know that they have as much of an organizing principle that binds them together. So I don't know that they will be as committed to what they've been committed to over these past 4 years in terms of enforcing this conformity doctrine. And so maybe it does decelerate something to some degree with Biden, because if Trump is no longer the rallying cry, or being anti-Trump is no longer the rallying cry, then what's the rallying cry? I know that there is a single one at that point, which might tamp down rather than ramp up some of these trends. Although I could be totally wrong. I don't know. But that's just sort of my hunch. But it's difficult to say. The analytical failure says we need nice username, by the way. I hope that doesn't apply to me, but if it does, I accept being owned. We need a vibrant, anti-partisan, populist media network. We need mass participation in journalism by politically engaged citizens. Legacy media is cancer. I agree. I definitely agree. And anti-partisan is almost a good way to put it, because nobody can be totally non-partisan, right? You're going to have political beliefs, and that can translate into political preferences in terms of voting, or in terms of how you identify within the political spectrum. But you can at least strive to be anti-partisan, meaning you're not constricted by that, or at least you attempt to be not constricted by it. Right, so I think there's actually something useful. There would be something useful about having a diversity of opinion within the same media organization. that could engender a certain amount of collective trust. Because if there is built into the ethos of a media organization a presumption that everybody's not going to always agree, and actually that's encouraged, that's healthy. That can actually strengthen your arguments. It can strengthen your analysis so that you're not prone to analytical failures. And I think the idea of participation by politically engaged citizens is also a great idea. I mean, I don't know how precisely that would work in terms of logistics, but it's a good thought. All right, so I'll leave it there for now. I'm currently in Georgia, just arrived tonight. I'm going to be spending the final few days before the election here in Georgia, and then probably in north central Florida. So if you have any interesting observations that are election related in either Georgia or north central Florida, send them my way. Maybe I could, I don't know, look into it or whatever. I did write something on Pennsylvania yesterday, or not yesterday, that was published today in Unheard, which I will do a specific video on tomorrow to delve into the findings there. So that'll do it. I'm asked where in Georgia I am. I'm in Augusta at the moment. I don't know if I probably won't stay here for the whole time. I want to go to like the suburbs of Atlanta and stuff and see, you know, what the flavor is in terms of people's election attitudes, because apparently Georgia is in contention. There have been some polls that show Biden ahead, some that show Trump still ahead, but either way, it's clearly competitive. So it's interesting to me because, you know, in 2016, I didn't come this far south. 2016, I spent the election day in North Carolina, where I just was for the past day or so. But I don't know. I have an instinct that maybe Georgia and well, it's not like an impressive instinct, but my sense is that Georgia and Florida will probably be pretty significant in terms of the outcome, or at least could be. So enough to warrant my presence here. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay cool. And I don't have a clever finishing line. Bye-bye.